Hello, vinyl community. I'm Gary, and this is Physical Format Rock and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning in. I would like to do another episode of my top 5 studio albums by a particular artist, and today I am talking about Mr. Jeff Beck. Now, I am not going to include any live albums on this, and I am not going to include anything that he did that wasn't under the moniker of Jeff Beck alone. So, nothing by the Yardbirds, and I'm also not going to include the Beck Bogert Apathy album that he did. So, those are out, just so you know. So anyway, what do we have left? Well, we have quite a lot of material. Jeff Beck, one of the most famous guitar players in the history of rock and roll, first rose to fame in the Yardbirds. He joined under a suggestion by his childhood friend Jimmy Page to join the Yardbirds after Eric Clapton departed. And even though he doesn't appear on more than, like, I think one album by the Yardbirds, you know how they did things then. They would record singles and albums and whatnot. Anyway, he is responsible or part of most of the Yardbirds' hits. He was quite an innovative guitar player, already starting in the 60s, and he only progressed from there. So, let's get started, shall we? Coming in at number 5 from 1969, it is Beck-Ola. This, of course, is the second album to feature a young Rod Stewart on vocals and Ron Wood on bass. Of course, after this album, they both would leave to join the Small Faces. Jeff Beck, even though they were supposed to play at Woodstock, they never did. They already had too much infighting and basically were broke up by the time Woodstock came around. Jeff Beck was thinking they weren't ready to play for some reason. It's a shame because I think it would have maybe solidified this group a little bit more and probably got them more fame, more prominence. This album also features a lot of good piano work by Nicky Hopkins, who's on here. Jeff Beck, is already doing a lot of great guitar work on here. There's a lot of jamming on this album. There's not a whole lot of original songs. They kind of take older songs and put their spin on them, but they do a great job. I don't think it quite has the firepower or the innovation as maybe their first album, but nonetheless, this is still a very good album, and it rocks a lot at times. It starts to get a little funky at times, and then there's like an old time rock and roll feel to it also. So, number 5, Beck-Ola. Coming in at number 4 from 1972, it would be the Jeff Beck Group, or what some people call the Orange album because of the orange that is on there. So this is the second album from this incarnation of the Jeff Beck Group. And we have Bob Tench on vocals, who at times sounds a bit like Rod Stewart. Max Middleton, once again, on piano. Clive Chasen on bass. And a young Cozy Powell on drums. This was the second album that Cozy Powell appeared on with Jeff Beck. And if nothing else, this album and the one before it, Rough and Ready, that Cozy is also on. It's pretty cool because, maybe if you're just familiar like with his work with Rainbow and some other bands like that, this gives you a little bit of a different style or different side of his playing. But this has a lot of wonderful songs on here. There's some hard rocking stuff on here. There's some really cool, funky stuff on here. Ice Cream Cakes is really good. Sugarcane, that's a nice, funky rocker. I really like that. So this has a lot of good playing on it, good singing, just an all-around good album. Good early 70s album, Jeff Beck Group. Now we're kind of changing direction a little bit. Jeff Beck, one of the problems he seemed to have was keeping a group together. Seemed like every time he would start to get things going, something would happen. He just couldn't get along with people. He also had a pretty bad car accident in the early 70s, which kind of sidelined him for a while too. Well, after going through some different bands and whatnot, he went a different direction, and in 1975, he created this masterpiece, Blow by Blow. This is produced by George Martin, Sir George Martin. I don't think he was Sir George Martin yet. But this, of course, is his first all-instrumental album. This is so influential on so many guitar players. It's a jazz rock fusion style album. You've got Max Middleton, again on keyboards, who is a holdover. He's played quite a bit with Jeff Beck. Jeff obviously can get along with him. Phil Chen on bass and Richard Bailey on drums. And at times, it's completely jazz fusion, and other times it's more rock. But Jeff just has some fantastic playing on here. To me, the highlight of this album would probably be "'Cause We've Ended as Lovers." His take on a Stevie Wonder number. Jeff Beck is famous for being able to take people's songs and doing an instrumental version of them and just really making it something wonderful to listen to, and that's an example of it. Another great song on here is Freeway Jam. This has some, just some of Jeff Beck's best guitar playing is on this album. This is terrific. It sounds fantastic, and it's just a great listen. So that's number 3. Number 2 might be a little controversial to some Jeff Beck fans to think that I am picking this particular one over Blow by Blow, but I love this album. From 1989, we have Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop. This is a Jeff Beck Return to Form album is what this is. The album before this would have been 1986's Flash, which is kind of a hit and miss album in my mind. This one, Jeff Beck gets rid of most of the jazz influence that he did have for a while, and this is pretty much straightforward rock for the most part. Once again, an all-instrumental album. There is some talking on the album. This is Tony Hymas, who works with Jeff Beck on a few different albums, on keyboard, synthesized bass lines that he adds to it, and Terry Bozzio. Terry Bozzio, of course, was a drummer from Missing Persons. And before that, he had played with Frank Zappa. The combination of these three is just wonderful. This is, if you don't own this album and you want to hear what Jeff Beck sounds like, I would recommend this, especially like if you want to hear more what he sounds like modern day. I think this is where he made a big switch. And, I also, full disclosure, I have some sentimental attachment to this album because this is the album that was out the first time I ever got to see Jeff Beck live. He hadn't been touring for quite a while, and he came back. He did a tour with Stevie Ray Vaughan. As you can imagine, just an amazing show. And the band that he had, the same guys that are on this album, it was just fantastic. He sounded so good. Guitar Shop is great. Stand on It. Um, Slingshot, Where Were You? That's great. Some of the slower songs on here and Behind the Veil are just fantastic. Big Block. This is just a great album. Just love it. All the playing on it is so terrific. So, number 2 from 1989, Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop. Coming in at number 1, probably not much of a surprise, but from 1968, Truth by Jeff Beck. This, of course, is his solo debut, where he started just going under the Jeff Beck moniker. Introduced most of the world to Rod Stewart, who does the vocals on this album. Some of Rod Stewart's best stuff. Rod Stewart has such a great voice. He sounds terrific on this. Ron Wood on bass, of course, is fantastic. The same band, except on drums on this one is Mick Waller, as opposed to the rest of the band that was on Beck-Ola. This is just great. This came out very close to the time that Led Zeppelin's first album came out. There are some similarities to this. They both do a version of You Shook Me. This album is maybe not quite as rocking, maybe, as Led Zeppelin's debut, but it's still fantastic. This is one of the best debut albums of all time. I'm so envious when I see the people out there with their Mo-Fi edition of this album, because that has to sound terrific. I already think it's a very good sounding record. I have a early demo copy, and Shapes of Things, it opens up the album, which of course was a Yardbirds song. They change it, they do their own version of it. They end it with I Ain't Superstitious. Of course, that's stolen from Howlin' Wolf, but like it says here, he said, I ain't superstitious. They talk about each song on here. And it says, stolen riff from old Howlin' Wolf tune. He said, but he doesn't mind. I asked him. He knows that I took this song. This number is more or less an excuse for being Flash on guitar. So yeah, this is definitely another super influential album to guitar players and just rock bands in general. This is considered a must-have for pretty much any rock fan to have. Jeff Beck, Truth. Wonderful, wonderful album. They're honestly picks number 4 and 5. Man, I went back and forth on some other albums. Rough and Ready was right there, and Wired could have easily been on this list, but for now, those are my top 5 Jeff Beck albums. So, curious what you think, what some of your favorite Jeff Beck albums are. Do you even care about Jeff Beck? I'm not sure. I know I love him. I don't know how many people out there do. But anyway, I'm Gary. This is Physical Format Rock and Roll. And until the next time, my friends, I will see you down the road.